Values-based innovation management is the title, and there's a couple of institutions involved that Lucia already mentioned. ESCP Europe, HMKW Berlin as our universities, UX Berlin as a business consultancy, and I'm also working on the Gamify project together with a European Knowledge Alliance, and some of the gamified methods going into this project also stem from this line of research. So while we are going into the topic a little bit, I would like to get you as well activated on the topic and ask yourself, which values do you engage for at work? So what do you consider important? What do you consider worth striving for as some very general definitions of values say. So while we are going through this, try to relate the whole topic a little bit to yourself, your experiences, your practices, and maybe that'll help us in the end to enter a little discussion based on that. So what we noticed, especially from working in consulting and innovation management for a couple of years, was that values do play a role in business and innovation in particular, but usually they play a role, just in the business aspects of branding or human resources, but they're rarely used to explicitly inform or to drive innovation and its management. So we decided to take a closer look into this kind of triangle defined through innovation, values, and management, asking how do values empirically impact and direct innovation and its management? How has it been the case in historical cases, in present cases? And how can values be used to facilitate innovation-related practices? I already said they're not explicitly, not consistently used to drive innovation management. Instead, innovation managers tend to look out for the next big thing, as was already mentioned in the videos, asking for what's the next big thing in consumer electronics, right? Is that like augmented reality games? To ask for the next big thing in energy, and usually there's these buzzwords like virtual power plants in energy business, or AI in mobility that then should give a direction for the whole community to start working on and innovating on. However, rarely people ask about what is really desirable for ourselves as a society, and maybe the next big thing could even look like this, right? Maybe it's nothing that looks really desirable at the first and second glance. In addition, unintended consequences may result from innovation, and it's an ongoing challenge to integrate these reflection and consideration of these potentially unintended consequences early on in the beginning of innovation projects. Paul Virilio, French architect and philosopher, was writing about this. To invent the sailing ship or the steamer is to invent the shipwreck. To invent the train is to invent the rail accident of derailment. To invent the family automobile is to produce the pile up on the highway. So there are these unintended consequences, and somehow we should deal with those as early as possible in innovation projects. Let's zoom back a few years in history. That's a famous image many of you will have seen before. The rests of the Porsche Spider that James Dean, just 24 years old, died in 1955. Driver safety was not a big issue back then. Driving was about speed, about having fun, about enjoying this new freedom of mobility. Some companies try to step in that domain, like a company that all of you are probably in touch with on a daily basis. Company named Corning. They produce the Gorilla Glass on the mobile phones still today. In the 1960s, they came up with a new glass for the windshields, similar to the laminated windshields that all of our cars are having today, but they were unable to sell it to the automobile industry or to the end consumers. And the historians were saying Americans were having such a love affair with their cars that safety was just not an issue. Safety did not sell at the time. In Europe, the situation developed a little bit differently. In 1944, Swedish Volvo introduced the safety cage and laminated windshields. In 1959, the modern three-point safety belt, and from the very beginning of the company, safety was at the forefront of their attention. As this word by the founders says, cars are driven by people. The guiding principle behind everything we make at Volvo, therefore, is and must remain safety. After Volvo and other companies like Saab in Europe picked up on this kind of value of safety, putting that to the forefront of the attention, making a value proposition out of that. After they had been very successful, first in the UK and then in the US, also American car manufacturers picked up on this notion of safety and integrated it into their innovation efforts. Today, as also many of you will know, the whole market for driver safety is a huge multi-billion-dollar market and a very agile and vivid field of innovation and entrepreneurship. So the question resulting from that may be that other, at this point in time, rather neglected values like sustainability orientation or even privacy may play a more dominant role in the near future as well.
Yes, so this points to an important thing about values. So as we state here, values abound. So nowadays we're talking a lot about sustainability issues, for example, triggered by the climate change debate, but also we talk a lot about privacy issues triggered by the dissemination of digital media, social media, etc. Privacy might be an important issue in the future, maybe even more important than today. But we can also think about much more values like we have here on the slide. For example, people might tend to care about beauty, joy, living a joyful life, living a respectful life, living a healthy life, safety for themselves, for the family, curiosity. So there's a lot that human beings, either as individuals or as groups, can care about. And these values can unfold into different directions. They can emphasize different issues, which in turn, and that's kind of our proposition, can drive innovation and can also constitute new markets based on different types of values. So Henning was already talking about safety in the car industry, which in the beginning was not that an issue, but became an issue, and nowadays it's an important value proposition that car manufacturers have to offer to the customers. But we can also think about different types of sustainability innovation, which might be about organic food, for example, organic cosmetics. Health markets are evolving more and more, but we could also think about efficiency-oriented markets where, for example, in B2B settings, efficiency services are sold between companies. So connecting this idea of omnipresent values, which are everywhere, literally, and are always present, connecting this notion of values to innovation management brings us a step closer to our framework, to our approach of values-based innovation management. And what we're doing in our framework and our little theory about values-based innovation management is that we build on the notion of integrated management, which means that from a more systemic perspective, we can see that organizations have kind of different levels on which management serves different functions. And we can maybe start from the bottom where we see the instrumental management level, which is associated to, for example, service innovations, product innovations, process innovations. We can think about the strategic management level, which is associated to business model innovation as a more systemic way of innovating. And we can also think about the normative management level, which is more about the big picture of an organization, which provides, for example, through values statements, vision statements, mission statements, contributes a lot to the organizational identity, or can also trigger innovation within networks between different organizations. And looking at the left of this framework, we see our values cloud and the globe, again representing the different values, which can have an influence on both the different types of management going on in an organization and the different innovation levers we can find from an innovation management perspective.
Right, so what we did was we looked into numerous cases and we found that values can play different functions on each of these three management dimensions. So they can have an integrative function because the hierarchical order of priorities allows inclusion of subordinate values once overarching values are being defined. So they can integrate, serve to integrate diverse stakeholder interests under shared values. They can play a directive function. So in case of doubt, they give a guideline how to decide. And they can have a generative function. They can serve as a heuristic to reframe problems, to identify emerging needs and markets, and to define directions and areas to search for potential solutions. And we will come back to this heuristic aspect in a little bit on the methodological part. And we can say that it's not a question of pursuing values or not pursuing values within an organization, but we can say just as every company has a business model, every company pursues values and normative orientations, but this role of values in business and innovation is not yet well understood. So we try to understand this better, and we hope that some of you might join us in this journey. The second, from a scientific point of view, more worrying aspect is that we would say that actually innovation cannot be well understood, designed, or managed without recurring to the values and normative orientations of those being involved. And that's at least surprising if you look into an innovation management textbooks, the index, you will find hardly any textbook where even the notion of value in this sense shows up. So we showed this through several cases. One of them is EcoZia.
Yeah, and EcoZia is one of the cases which can better or maybe fully be understood if you consider the values of this particular company. And if we look at the top of the slide, we see that the core values of EcoZia relate to sustainability, but also they have strong user focus. They care a lot about integrity, good leadership, and happiness within EcoZia. And if we walk through our little framework from the bottom, starting from the more instrumental innovations we found in this case, we see, for example, different process innovations, which are, for example, a lot about integrating all employees and their ideas, for example, into product development and innovation processes within EcoZia. Looking at their products and services, we see that their core product, which is the search engine, so you can even call it a green Google, is increasing the impact of users, the environmental impact of users, because for a certain amount of searches that people do on EcoZia, trees are planted through reforestation projects around the world. And this also translates into specific services like offering this search engine, for example, as a default search engine for organizations interested in this service. Moving to the strategic level, this all merges into the business model, which is maybe the key feature of EcoZia, which is about earning money through running a search engine online, but for roughly every 45 searches that are run on this engine, EcoZia plants one new tree. So they are using the incomes that they gained through advertising on their platform for sure to pay the costs of the company, to pay the employees, etc. But the profit goes into trees. That's the specifics about the business model of EcoZia. And this comes or relates to the big vision of EcoZia, which is stated like to cultivate a world where all humans live together compassionately and in balance with nature. And their goal is to plant 1 billion trees by 2020. If you look at the website, they're currently stating they planted roughly more than 70 billion trees. So they are quite far away from the 1 billion, but I think that's also the idea of setting yourself or giving yourself a big vision to stay motivated, to stay ambitious. And this also then translates into, for sure, the specific identity of EcoZia, but also into the network and the partnerships that EcoZia is engaging in. Yeah, as I already mentioned, we looked into several cases. You find more than 25 cases, for example, in our book on values-based innovation management. And what we're doing there is we are offering a different perspective of some already well-known cases like IBM, Patagonia, Dropbox, for example. And what we are doing there is we are opening the black box a little bit about how the values of these companies, but also their customers and other stakeholders relate to specific innovations that we see with these companies.
Right, so most of these companies have applied values in a very interesting and specific way. And what we learn from them, we try to translate into appropriate methods, because first thing we found is that values, or roughly speaking, notions of the desirable and normative orientations, can and should be used to drive innovation across different phases of an innovation process. And appropriate research, facilitation, and management methods are required to do so and to work with these values. So one approach is to just reframe existing methods, like we already mentioned in the video. Another approach is to really start from scratch, exploring values within an organization, exploring the values of the people working there, and making those explicit and putting them to use to drive innovation through different management levels, on the very operative instrumental levels up to the strategic and more normative domains. So some of the methods we looked into and we've been working with is ethnographic exploration, normative scenarios, or the IBM case of a values jam that can be used for exploration and a review of values. Then if we go into negotiating, specifying values as a kind of normative orientation for an organization or a project, we saw storytelling and different mapping exercises. We worked ourselves with lettering techniques to define an organizational purpose. And stakeholder workshops are another method that has been used in this domain. Then when it comes to ideation and facilitation, we see different methods of gamification or futures workshop or values-based business modeling tools. Also sustainability-oriented business modeling tools that can be used to drive innovation, not only based on a narrow focus on, I would say, on economic concerns, but taking into consideration the social and ecological aspects of generating or developing new business. Finally, if we come to the vitalization or evaluation of innovation activities based on outcomes, again, games come into play. Like the Global Compact Dilemma game is one game that has been issued by the United Nations to track sustainability impact and to push issues related to that, or different measures of impact assessment. Since just one of these methods we will go into today, I guess, for reasons of timing. Some of you will be familiar with ethnographic research. So the way it works is usually you identify a panel of participants that can be participants from a certain customer group your company is aiming at, but it can be also different stakeholder groups. It could be your own employees in the organization. It could be a supplier. You try to visit these stakeholders in their natural habitat, so to say, you give them a couple of questions, you film them, you spend some time with them in order to really understand the world and the context they are living in, and you formulate different insights to advance your business. So what you do is you proceed from an observation to an identification of patterns and so-called insights. And these can be focused, for instance, on customer values. In order to document your observations and your insights, different structures have been applied, and this is the one structure we would propose to do so that you identify certain desires, certain values, and conflicts. So a classical example that actually resulted from an ethnographic study with a cloud computing company was they found, well, typical finding, customers want to keep control of their data, so that, and that's the value behind that, so that they feel safe from potential intrusions to their privacy. But there's conflicting issues like intransparent software design and regulations keep me from taking appropriate measures. So there's always the desire or what customers want, what they ask for, but we shouldn't be stopping at that stage, but actually see what's behind it, right? What is motivating these wants or needs or desires? And this is what values add on to this. So what is the reason behind it? And what is the conflicting issue here? To give you a more recent example from a research we did with a service provider that is sending regular their staff regularly to their business customers. You can think of a cleaning service or an inspection service where people regularly enter your business premises, and some of these client respondents we talked to, they said, well, if these people keep running into my shop, into my office, I actually want to have a casual chat with them. Yeah. So, and if you just stay on that level, you can say, well, okay, so give them a chatbot or something they can talk to. But if you dig deeper into the issue and ask for what kind of values are behind this kind of desire, you find that this is motivated by values of mutual appreciation and respect, which they try to implement as part of their culture. But, and then it shows up the conflict, they notice that a lot of these service providers are in such a hurry, they are so efficiency oriented, you could say, that they're in a kind of escape mode and hurry that they neither say when they're coming nor when they're leaving. And that doesn't leave them with a feeling of appreciation and respect, which they consider very important for their business. So, and if you get that angle onto the issue, then it gives you a new triggers or levers for facilitation, and it leads to different new ideas for innovation, first to new challenges. So questions like how can service providers express appreciation for their clients in everyday life? How can we enable service providers to actively shape the relationship? And you come up with different ideas like providing them with a new customer journey or actually with new business model ideas like defining different service level agreements for different needs and different kinds of clients. So actually, one thing we learn out of this also is that once you start considering the values of different stakeholder groups, it's not very well defined how you end up with. If you end up with the ideas for product innovation, service innovation, or business model innovation. So they can inspire innovation on all these different levels. Due to reasons of time, we will skip the next two examples that we have, one from the energy business, one where we actually worked on the values, purpose, mission, and vision of a new rapidly growing company also applying different techniques of storytelling, laddering, challenges, exercises like heaven and hell to create a corporate vision for this kind of company and translating that into appropriate business goals, measures, and criteria. Anyway, we will upload the slides of this presentation afterwards, so you can have a look into this. What we want to do at the end of our presentation is give you a quick outlook into what's coming up next. So ISPIM next year, 2020, we will be welcoming all of you in Berlin, and we have a focus theme which is values-based, circular and sustainability oriented innovation management. So values-based innovation will play a major role throughout that conference. We will do a special track and invite interesting contributions focusing on this topic. We are preparing a journal, a special issue journal on managing values for innovation.
Yeah, so we cannot say right now which journal we are aiming at because it's still not decided. It's still to be submitted and reviewed, this proposal for a special issue, but you can imagine it will be an innovation journal for sure. What we're trying here is to ask rather fundamental and basic questions about how values can be managed for innovation. And you see we're inviting the full spectrum of studies. You can think of like empirical studies, because we did some case work. Others are starting to do case work as well, but I think there's much more to learn from empirical phenomena at the intersections between values and innovation. We're also interested in learning about innovation research methods. So the question is, how can you investigate academically, scientifically, the relationships between values and innovation management? But we're also interested in innovation facilitation methods. That's mainly the question, how can it be done in practice? So companies are really trying to apply a values-based approach to the innovation management. What kind of methods beyond those we are talking about in the book and Henning just introduced can we think of? But also rather fundamental theoretical contributions, because that's kind of a hard and tricky exercise. We have to merge different theoretical perspectives coming from cultural studies, for example, psychology, sociology, to theoretical frameworks and notions from innovation studies. There's still a lot to be done, and this is what we're going to invite once we can publish the call for papers. But the idea is after ISPIM 2020 to collect papers for this special issue.
Right, and our basic issue is to better understand the role of values in different aspects of innovation management and in entrepreneurship. And we were very happy to see that we got John Bessant on board as a third co-editor for this special issue, and we will let you know as soon as possible which innovation journal we got an agreement with to pursue this project. Final aspect, and this can also be interesting to some of you. So some of you may know that we are already heavily involved, or at least I'm already heavily involved in a very interesting and very valuable project named Gamify, where we're dealing with new gamification methods in innovation and entrepreneurship. And one of the issues we found is that values, if we follow up on the values issue, that especially these are difficult to access, difficult to translate into appropriate behavior and practices. And that gamification, on the other hand, is a particularly well-suited approach to facilitate just that, namely values-based innovation workshops, for instance, because they provide a collaborative, experiential, and practice-oriented mode of learning. So what we want to do is to follow up on the Gamify project and develop new gamification methods that focus on facilitating values-based innovation management activities in organizations. Good. So much from our side for today. There will be more to come, but I haven't been following the chat so far. Florian, do we have any ideas from our participants about their ideas, cases, and experiences, or some of the values and stakeholders they've been working with, or some of the methods and approaches that all of you have been applying, or just any questions you have on what we presented and what there is to come?
So we got, in the beginning of the presentation, we got a comment from Jos, I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, writing that examples for important values are, for example, respect and the considering to avoid unintended consequences for people and planet. And Jos, sorry, is also then asking a question here in the F&A section where he or she is writing, I see the innovative factor of values-based innovation management, but I'm missing the link to sustainability. Is it better or worse to use certain values when innovating? Are there guiding principles to construct the vision, mission, which are per se not exploiting the planet and people? So maybe you can still think, Henning, and I can just start answering and you step in. I like this question for, okay, what's the link between the values-based approach to innovation and innovation management and sustainability? So on a very general level, the link is that sustainability is, so to speak, one form or one expression of values-based innovation management. So we are not saying that values-based innovation is always sustainable or sustainability innovation, but we're saying that sustainable innovation is one instance of values-based innovation. And then the link is that, for example, we developed a little model where we identify different entry points where values can have an effect on organizations and the innovation activities. And these entry points are, for example, certain stakeholder relationships, like the relationship to customers, the relationships to the media, to policy making, to the neighborhood in which a company is operating. And once organizations engage in what you could call values conversations, sustainability considerations might enter, so to speak, the universe of this company. So sometimes the link is created by simply, the external environment pushing a company to do something about sustainability. But then not to just run around and do green stuff, or maybe in the worst case, greenwashing. It's up to the organization to really think about how to integrate these concerns of my stakeholders, which in this case might, for example, relate to animal welfare, climate change, the future of mobility, etc. So this would be my initial answer to start, creating the link between values-based and sustainable innovation.
Yeah, if I may add on to this, so I wouldn't say that a values-based approach is a guarantee that you end up with more sustainable innovations, but I would say that on the one hand, it increases probably the likelihood that if you reflect on what you consider important for yourself, for society, that more sustainable innovations result from that. That if you take potential consequences, even unintended consequences, into consideration from the beginning, that we will end up with more sustainable solutions. On the other hand, I think that even if a company decides it wants to not only go for the single profit line of economic growth and rapid shareholder value, but for different kinds of social value creation, environmental, ecological value creation, in addition to an economic perspective, that soon the question comes up, where do you set your priority? If a company works on SDGs, on associated targets, right? So they have to negotiate and set the priorities where they want to be engaged in. And this also, I think, leads back to the personal engagement and the values of those being involved in that process, and about the question how these values are being codified. But yeah, I would also say at this point of time, we're more interested in also on an empirical perspective. So how actually do values impact innovation in different companies, in organizations, and how can we apply different methods to increase awareness and to facilitate processes under this kind of framing.
Henning, I keep you thinking. So because Mark is asking a question that I think extends or can extend what you just explained. So Mark is asking, driving change in corporate culture towards business ethics and sustainability most often requires support from top management. Can you give some insights on how to sensibilize leaders to engage with values-based business operation at the first place? So how to make leaders aware of certain values which might be sustainability related to kind of stimulate a more top-down process, which is one possibility that we see in our framework, but we also see bottom-up or more horizontal introductions of new values. But here the question is, Henning, how to do it more from the top management level to stimulate sustainability-oriented culture change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's of course a lot to discuss on this issue, but I mean, sometimes it's even the top management asking you for it, right? So that was the case that I couldn't explain here in more detail, the last one with this cleaning company. So they had a history of rapid growth behind them, a very diversified business model where yeah, the top management was not even sure if everybody was aware of what's the business model in the first place. And we started this kind of activities with them. And the one sympathetic thing I think about this values-based approach is that you cannot purely run it top down, right? So you need to ask your employees what is important for them, because you cannot install values into a company the back of the employees, right? So we try to investigate those, and they came to understand the first time what motivates their employees to be there, what keeps them from losing the company in a challenging, not very well paid environment. And I mean, through their employees, they learned that actually environmental concern was a higher relevance issue than they thought, and it became part of formulating the purpose, mission, and vision that this company is now giving itself for the next upcoming years. So that can be one approach. I mean, oftentimes, like we have also in the IBM example, it's in a time of difficulties, even of economic downturn, that the question comes up within an organization: what do we stand for? What are we here for in the first place? How can we keep our people motivated? And that kind of allows you to review and negotiate these issues and to define a new and hopefully more sustainable corporate mission and vision.
So another question that's also fitting nicely to this discussion is, can the values-based innovations be introduced to organizations by intrapreneurship programs? So the last question was about the possibilities of doing it more top-down, but now the question is rather to intrapreneurship. So can this also be a way of introducing a values-based approach?
Yes, I mean, I think that's a very helpful approach, actually, to allow employees, to allow people in the organization to drive their own projects, right? So we have the case of Atlassian, and Google picked that up later on, and some companies like 3M are still practicing this kind of innovation time-off approach, where employees define their own projects based on what they consider important, as what they consider a valuable challenge to tackle, and to take some of their working time to follow up on that project and to come up with new solutions in that domain. And intrapreneurship programs are one, I think, closely associated way to do this. And of course, I mean, this whole discourse, I would say, on new work and innovation, how to establish an innovation culture in an organization is very closely associated to such a values-based approach, because the work culture and the personal engagement of the participant relies on what values they bring into the game and how they can make those explicit and put that to work for what they're working for, instead of having to leave that out on the parking lot like it used to be some decades ago.
Another question coming from Gregor. Do you have any experience with VBI in startups or with VCs, venture capitalists?
Yeah, I mean, we looked into, I mean, for startups, it's the kind of the same challenge, right? I mean, I got to know a whole bunch of startups that are actually just systematically looking for the next big thing and seeing, okay, so where can we find the best market potential to copy something that's already out there and turn that into something profitable very fast. Or you can see entrepreneurs, founders starting up new firms that are really dedicated to what they're addressing through their business, right? So this is actually how EcoZia started, right? Noticing the environmental impact that online search actually has and trying to come up with a new business model that compensates for these negative impacts. So I mean, there's different startups. Actually, I mean, for startups, it's often probably more controllable because the founders have higher impact on where the whole thing is leading. And one thing we found is that it is very valuable to clarify that upfront. And also, especially if you have different founders, we saw several examples of values-based conflicts leading to a failure because these founders started working on given assumptions not sufficiently reflecting their values, their priorities, which kind of priority they give to, for instance, financial returns or rapid returns or for social concerns, for instance. And sometimes once these potential conflicts, these values-based conflicts are not addressed in the beginning of the startup phase of the firm, they can end up to conflicts later on down the road. And that's also an interesting issue that actually a master's student of mine is currently working on also. So if you're more interested in that, send me a note and I will put you in contact and maybe be able to share that master thesis on values-based conflicts among co-founders of startups. So, but I think it's a highly relevant issue in that domain.
Okay, looking at the time, it's 10 to 5. Maybe we talk about one or two more questions before we wrap up.
If Lucia lets us.
Yes, I agree with you. Maybe two more questions, and maybe if you can say in the end, where can actually everyone reach you since you are so popular?
Okay, so first of all, thanks a lot to Garth. We received many comments from this participant. So recommendation, Michael Quinn Patton's work on principles-focused evaluation. I didn't hear of it before. Maybe we should look into this. Maybe Henning, you know it. So then another comment from Garth. Yes, Schwarz values. We are also working a lot with the notion of values according to Schwarz. So that's also our point of entry into this, conceptual theoretical realm of values. So totally agree. It's a useful and globally useful understanding of values. And then comes a question from Garth, which is, Henning, again, I'm asking you because it's easier for me this way. to what extent have you looked at the role of stories, narratives, to communicate values and make them explicit?
Yeah, I think that's a quite interesting methodological approach, and we've been utilizing that, for instance, in these workshops with this cleaning company, yeah, that you go into some storytelling. If these values haven't been reflected early on, like we just said, once the company is starting up, the issue comes up later on down the road, and then you need to kind of look back into the history of the organization and into yeah, how the whole company came about, but also into a situation from present day in which these values exemplify themselves or demonstrate the impact they actually have on strategic decisions, on innovation related decisions. So I think it's a very helpful and very useful approach, and we started looking into that. But of course, if you have more experience in that, it will be a very valuable contribution also to this special interest group. And that, I think, brings us here to this last slide. So Lucia is just set up here a new webpage on this special interest group for values-based and sustainable innovation under the link that you see here. We closely collaborate also with a special interest group on teaching and coaching innovation, especially for the methodological parts, and we hope to closely collaborate with a special interest group for responsible innovation, because I think especially when it comes to the sustainability issues, there's some overlap, even though also, of course, it's a slightly different perspective on the whole issue. There's a website for our book. Of course, we are happy to share chapters, at least from our book. We do not have the rights from the editor to just give away the full book. And we have what, when it comes to values-based gamification approaches, also the Gamify site, and we will publish our yeah, upcoming results in these domains on that website as well. So there are several online sources you can go into, and we will try to make sure that also both our email addresses will appear at least on the special interest group website. And of course, you're all invited to directly contact us if you want to join in, if you have a question, if you have a new method that you think could be valuable, if you have a certain domain like special kinds of startups, special cases that could enrich this discussion here. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from you again through one of these channels.